Welcome to the Renegade Lifestyle, seeking to empower you with practical strategies and information to exit the matrix and become ungovernable. Today we are joined by Shaun Hayes, who is the author of The Grey Choice and was the founder and and former CEO actually of Allegiant Bank Corp, headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, among many other enterprises. He owned a company that he sold at age 44 for $500 million. 5 years after selling his company, Shaun committed a felony. He was incarcerated for his crime 8 years later. He now shares what he learned from his rise and fall, hard-earned lessons that can benefit individuals, groups, and businesses. Welcome to the show, Shaun. How's it going?
George, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be with you today. In interesting times, I will add.
Interesting times, and the interesting times, hard times um, create like strong people, and I think a lot of people will get a lot stronger as things carry on. And I think these kind of conversations are excellent for people to hear and to get different insights from different people who have done quite successful businesses and have been in the game for a while. For people who don't know your work, give your background story and what you've. I mean, I guess I covered that a little bit in the intro, but just go into your story. I know you're slightly different actually compared to our usual kind of people who come on here and talk about their past. So give your background and some of the story you've got.
Well, right out of college, I went to work for a large bank based in the Midwest. Spent 7 years with them, and then by default ended up buying a bank with another guy and a group of investors, and ended up being the CEO of that. We went public. I like to tell people from your world, we're one of the few companies that went public without ever selling a share of common to the public until right before we sold. Honestly, we use it as currency to buy other banks. That was our strategy. Um, we had an unbelievable run. We grew 80-fold over 14 years, which in the banking industry is very unique. And then after that, I spent a lot of time with one of the 10 largest banks in the country. And then I when the recession of '08 to 11, or whatever you want to moniker you want to put on those years, hit, I was heavily invested in banks and in real estate. And there were months in early '08 that I was losing $10 million a month. And by '09, I didn't see a way out. And so I committed a crime. I knew when I did it, it was a crime. I justified it, George, because I wasn't taking money. I was really manipulating things to buy myself time. And in reality, I only bought myself about 10 or 11 months. And then I ended up in prison and a whole lot of consequences. Along the way, I've owned manufacturing, hospitality companies, food service, healthcare, and I won many awards from E&Y, from the University of Missouri, from the St. Louis Press about being an entrepreneur. And I never called myself one. And you started off your show today with exactly interesting times, and you were talking about them. And I believe I've always been an opportunist. And I believe we're entering a season of tremendous opportunity again. And we haven't seen this in quite a while. There's a cleansing coming, not an '08 to 11. Obviously, I'm not a doomsayer, but so as an opportunist, I'm very excited about the future. And as I'll tell your guest, nothing's off limits with me. You can ask me anything you want to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of people might be very doom and gloom about what's coming. I do see a big collapse economically in regards to prices, in regards to potential hyperinflation, etc. But if you're on the right side of this event, you can really profit from it. Really, I mean, obviously, there's going to be a lot of people wiped out, in my opinion, who have been heavily leveraged and don't have real assets, etc. But there are opportunities, and I think that's why having you on the show today was actually a really good one for the listeners, because these are the times where you really want to be on the right side, morally also, but also take advantage of some of the opportunities. If you're in the know a little bit more, you can really take advantage at these moments, really. So speak a bit more, actually. I wanted to know a little bit about the, I mean, what exactly was the felony? in regards to
Well,
like the manipulation?
what I'd done was I had watched a man in interesting times in the late 80s buy a lot of non performing bank assets and put them in banks. And he made hundreds of millions of dollars. He owned a lot of small banks. And you don't think about banks putting non performing loans on their books. He justified it by getting guarantors who were able to service the debt. And he did equity sharing. So as times were bad, it was '09. I knew a guy who was a good friend of mine, and he had a lot of problems. And so we bought $16 million worth of his debt at a 50% discount. And he went out and got a friend who was a doctor, a car dealer, and another real estate gentleman who all had plenty of cash and cash flow to service this debt so we could book performing loans. All that's legal. The problem was he and I had owned a corner in St. Louis County for many years that a Target was going to go in, and in '08 they canceled their contract. They couldn't borrow money at 12% actually was the rate they could borrow money in the market. It was so bad, so they canceled their contract. That loan was at one of the banks we negotiated a discount. They said, we want you to take this performing loan because he's also involved with that. We don't have anything to do with this man. Well, I was a benefactor. Well, I owned 54% of that bank. If you own more than 25% of a bank in the United States, you can't do business with yourself really in any way, shape, or form other than write a check. Under 25%, you have to have a board of director approval. I was not a board member, but I decided this transaction was so lucrative for the bank that this would just, it would liquidate. Because the thing was, he was incentivized in this to not only get rid of the debt, but he had a profit upside from his investors. His investors had a profit upside, and the bank had an upside. The error I made was, one, I committed a felony. I knew it was wrong. That's a given. But beyond that, I believed he wanted to survive as bad as I did. And the mistake in that was, what I didn't realize is that was about a tenth of his problems. And he saw it as, well, a tenth of my problems are gone. Somebody else will figure this out, and I'm not going to touch it. And he literally didn't do a thing. So he not only put me in a precarious situation, the bank, the three good friends of his ended up in the same place. And of course, without the person who knew how to work through this, working through it, it didn't work. And unlike when you rob a 7-Eleven over here, in a crime like this, it doesn't just happen and the police get on it. It was years later. And there were many times over that time. And that's why in the book I have a chapter, Drip, 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 because the investigation went on for about 4 years before I was indicted. And the U.S. Attorney's Office here is very leaky, as one attorney would tell me. And every so often they call and say, well, they passed on you. You're okay. And then finally, in Christmas of 2015, they decided that they were going to indict me, and they did 4 months later. So that was the crime. It was very complicated, to say the least. But I knew day one, moment one, I was committing a crime. And I don't deny that. I'm remorseful. I cost myself a lot of money. I injured my family, and there were other investors and employees who I damaged as well.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of lessons learned, really, and people make mistakes, and at the end of the day, I guess you're a kind of capitalist, so like, you try to make the most of the situation there, but we're all prone to mistakes, and I think it's interesting that you came out and actually discussed that quite openly, which is pretty cool. I think that's a sign of comfort on your own self, really, and the lessons that you've learned there. I want to move on, actually, because I know we have a limited time, and I know you're a bank man, or you were in the banking system, and I want to really move on to where the recent developments with SVB, Signature Bank, issues with the European banks, and pretty much all banks, really. What are your thoughts on the sort of current collapse of certain banks, and where you see it moving going into the next few years?
Well, I see, and I think the Wall Street Journal had a great article on this yesterday. This is going to be you're going to see a slow process of banks disappearing. I didn't say necessarily failing, because we've now entered the last 15 years. The government likes to say, I had a 500,000 shares of National City, and they didn't say they failed. They sold. Well, they sold for $2 a share, and it had been 42. Uh, that's a way of not closing them, and we saw that with Credit Suisse. We're seeing it in other places, and that's what you're going to see a lot of. And it's really, I have to digress for 1 minute and say, it's certainly at Silicon Valley Bank, and what I can tell at First Republic, if they didn't make ethical, they certainly made unethical decisions. They made criminal decisions because you and I both know they had one, they knew those bonds were underwater, and two, they took bonuses, sold stock, and did things that they shouldn't have done because their model showed, if nothing else, their earnings would be depressed for years, or certainly for some period of time until rates change directions. Because this time it's not the 08-11 credit issue. Now I think the credit issue thing's coming. I'll get to that in a moment. But right now it's the late 70s, early 80s in the U.S. savings and loan crisis of we're long and rates went up and now we're broke. And the good news is regulators are more proactive than they've ever been. I didn't say good, I said more proactive. And because they still manage everything from the rearview mirror. So these banks are now having to pull down their shorts. And I think yesterday it said virtually every one of the top 10 banks yesterday said they had moved securities, as many as $80 billion in securities, to held to maturity, and their losses were 10 to 20% of capital. That's a big hit. If those were in loan losses, we call this a credit crisis. And then some banks moved as much as 20 to 40% of those into held to maturity. And so they're covering up their losses, is what you and I would say. You were an investment banker. You know what bond traders I do. How do I not recognize that loss? They're trying to spread them over time. That will buy the industry some time, but it's going to create some weak banks. The real key in this, and I don't know the answer to this one, is information moves so fast. And no one would have thought that Silicon Valley Bank would have closed that quickly. And I think the way deposits are now in mobile banking and internet banking and the speed of information, bank runs will look so different, and they already do, than they have before, that the regulators have a real challenge. That's why I say you're going to see a lot of mergers. You're going to see a lot of banks that should close on Monday get bought on Sunday. And I think that's how they're going to work through this. The real issue and the opportunity for your listeners is what I call the law of unintended consequences. And I have a speech in about an hour on this very topic. And what's going to happen is the regulators are saying, watch interest rate risk, watch liquidity. Well, when bankers do that, they inherently say, well, gosh, I better tighten credit standards. And so they're going to start, the marginal borrower is going to feel the squeeze on one end of that. At the same time, with interest rates rising, hurdle rates are higher, cost of capital is higher, deals get marginal in a hurry. Deals don't get done. That causes the economy to slow down. Marginal deals get thrown out of the bank, and there's not another lender because the weak sisters are being culled out. So I think you're going to see a lot of assets depreciate in value, and I expect in particular in real estate, because that's a natural place that banks tighten first. But it goes across the country and around the world these days, and it goes into every asset class. So I think you've got that. Coupled with my last comment is the Fed's really walking a tightrope, as you know. They needed to raise rates more. They were afraid to. So do you kill banks, or do you create very high inflation? I think they're on a tightrope that will be an interesting walk, and that in itself will cause uncertainty, which causes fear, which causes price to drop.
Yeah, I think we're seeing I think personally it's inevitable that a massive collapse occurs, either through hyperinflation or through huge interest rates being risen, and then you cause economic issues with banks which will collapse, or obviously foreclosures on homes, stuff like that. So either way, I think we're headed to something massive, and I believe this is to usher in what the WEF call the Great Reset, which is the reset of the economy, in my opinion, where they will introduce the central bank digital currency. And I see this as a total control system once they introduce the CBDC. Hey guys, just wanted to let you know about the upcoming event you don't want to miss, Monerotopia 23, the People's Money event happening May 6th and 7th in Mexico City. Join Monero developers, privacy tech project contributors, cypherpunks, and free speech advocates for talks and workshops, including Monero 101 for beginners and advanced workshops for contributors. Plus, there will be an Adoption Alley section showcasing projects and companies that already currently accept Monero. Tickets are very affordable, starting at $99 for all 3 days, with a special $25 ticket for locals. Use promo code RENEGADE to get 10% off at monerotopia.com. I haven't heard you speak much about them, or if you have a sort of an idea of the sort of central bank digital currency, because they're being discussed pretty much everywhere and they're being tested everywhere right now. Even the Fed have created a sort of new system, Fed Now. I guess what are your thoughts on that point of view, really, that we're sort of headed towards this inevitable plan? How successful would this plan potentially be, hypothetically? Because just because it's a plan, it doesn't necessarily mean it will occur.
Can you hear me, George?
I can hear you, yeah.
I believe that it's coming and it's going to come quicker. It's coming and it's going to come quicker. And I tell you what, I really think the impetus was the beginning of the collapse of the cryptocurrency market and the issues there. And now you've got not a Fed that wants to change it for a whole lot of reasons on their agenda. They get to be the white knight. We're making the world a better, safer place. We're government. We're good. We're going to help you. You know, it's much better if Ronald Reagan had a great quote. He said that the scariest sentence in the English language is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Well, they're here to help now. And that will be the guys that you're going to get this. They've wanted it for a long time. They're going to get it. And the door's open. It's wide open. And if you notice, there's a lot of hearings now, a lot of regulatory issues around cryptocurrency. And those guys and gals are going to get squeezed like they've never seen. And then all of a sudden the government's going to appear because it's something they want. It's here. Now, is that this year? I don't know. But I tell you what, before this decade's over, you're going to have it. I have to ask you two questions about your generation because it goes back to things you've said. What's your first mortgage? What was the interest rate on your first mortgage?
It was between 1% and 2%, I think.
Okay. I was so happy when I bought my first house almost 39 years ago, and I got a 12.5% 1-year ARM. Just to give you perspective, that's what we have, a generation that's never seen anything. They've never seen rates where they are now. So, you know, before the last, that to me is really a scary thing. The second thing is this question here. Over the last several months, I'm really intrigued by this Airbnb thing in the U.S. And I was at lunch a few months ago with some intelligent people, about 8 people, and one of them had 8 Airbnb homes around the country. Now, you're sitting there thinking, hotels are always a lousy investment. Well, where do you think that's going to hit? Look at all these houses that people own that they don't have a utility for them other than it's really a hotel room, and they're levered with low rates. And so I really am zeroed in on not, again, a quick collapse, but a long-term painful period in that asset class, starting off with people like you who I have to say my third mortgage, I was so happy, was an 8% 30-year mortgage that I paid 3 points to get. Wow.
Yeah. Things have changed, and people, I think, I mean, it's just interesting to see how the real estate market will react, because I think we're pretty much head on to a collapse. And I've heard this before as well, a slow price decrease, but it will be substantial. And I think a lot of people have taken, this is the cleansing event, as it always happens really every sort of decade or so. So I do think this one will be larger than it has been in the past. It always seems to get bigger. I think it was like 40% in 2008 or 2009. And then there's some forecasts saying about 60% this time, which which would be interesting, coupled with the fact that jobs are being lost through to technology well, I say improvements, but stuff like AI will probably wipe out many jobs up until 2030 as it gets better. So we're in a very precarious scenario where really people won't be able to get the jobs to pay for any of these things. I can only see a system coming through where UBI, I think this is the end game, where UBI comes in with your central bank digital currency given to people who basically have enough to eat and to have their basic needs, so they can basically not produce carbon as another scam tax system that will come in. I just see basically like a Bolshevik communist dictator technocracy kind of thing happening. But saying all of that, we have to look at the opportunities, because I always say that the free market and people will always come up with opportunities, even through which I think is one of the most precarious times, in a sense where technology has grown so hard that we've got government who have more power in that, because they actually can utilize this to their advantage in control. But there always is the free market, and there always is ways around these systems. I mean, what do you feel would be the opportunities after this sort of event and these kind of, the next decade of opportunities, and where do they lie?
Anytime something falls, I think there's going to be so much blood in the real estate market. There'll be people who literally have very little will become multimillionaires or billionaires from what happens here. So I see real estate as one. You got to watch it fall, and you're not going to catch the bottom. So you've got to really, it's like any asset class when you analyze it. Um, I agree with you. I'm really starting to get in this country. There's no such thing as fast food anymore. There's no employees, but I think technology and COVID will create a lot of opportunities in the food business, because you're going to do things with technology. People don't expect to eat in, so you have carry out, you have delivery, and I think those kind of things are really opportunities. If you're the small individual and you say, how do I start a business now? It's those kind of niches where you can use technology, and you can use people's desire not to be in big crowds anymore, not to go out as much, and not to do things. So I think there's a lot of things, and those are low barrier entry things. Those are things you can do that you don't have to have millions of dollars to do. But I'm with you. I'm a eternal optimist, but I love the opportunities. And that's why I used the word opportunist a while ago in front of myself and your listeners, because they're not going to they haven't had this chance in 15 years, and it isn't here yet, but it's on its way. It's happening every day, and they probably won't have it again for another 15. So the theory is, pick out what you like, watch it closely, be disciplined, and then get in. I love Nike when they say just do it, because I see so many people, and I've seen this in my career, that are getting ready to get ready. Well, there's a point where you just have to do it. And I think you're going to see that. I think you're giving very wise counsel, though, in the fact that these are the things that are coming. You're looking at the macro things. I have to say this. My graduate school roommate, I had two. One of them is a senior economist at the Fed, still today. And I was with a very conservative bank that actually right now is just getting roasted. And it's not credit risk. We never took over liquidity and interest rate risk. And I said, our CEO is concerned about the deficit. And he said to me, Shaun, we're going to monetize it. And I was a young, and I said, this was before you could just Google monetize, and you didn't carry around a dictionary. And I said, would you explain that? And he goes, we're going to inflate our way through this. And we've had so much money spent by government, especially, in the developed industrial countries over the last few years, for really no return, just to let people stay home and do this and not do that, that you've got inflation just sitting there. And so I would tell them to get a history book, an economic history book, and look at the late 70s and early 80s. And it's going to be the same kind of opportunities overlaid with the use of technology. And I didn't know what AI, I knew what AI was. I saw that movie like 20 years ago. But a few months ago, I started a second book with a co-author. And so we started on it. And then the next thing I know, I got a whole lot of work done that had been sent to me, and it was in a time period that didn't make sense. And AI had written it. And I have to say it was pretty darn good. And that's today. A year from today, it'll be totally different. So it's here.
Yeah, I mean, I see like basically so many scams coming, and also like in a sense where AI, you won't even know if it's human who's done it, and they can even do voices basically in your own voice. So like there'll be so many scams where like especially in the older generation they'll receive phone calls and they can basically mimic your a grandma's son, and they can just say, oh, I've lost my wallet, I need some money, and then they'll send it. Like it's literally um, just throwing them into the sharks. I think it's going to be an interesting time with AI, and I think there's a lot of education that needs to go around about it.
Oh, there's
Obviously,
a whole business right there, not only in dealing with AI and in telephone scams and things like that, which I agree with you, but I wasn't on social media till before the book came out, and for a while I must have gotten a half a dozen a day people who friended, which we took anyone because we were building a base for the book, and immediately wanted me to buy cryptocurrency from them. And my theory is that's an AI program behind it, and
yeah,
that just what you're saying. So there's a heck of a business in people preparing people for that. I have to say one thing: anybody that you have in your audience that thinks this way, anything that's a subscription business, I love. If you can figure out a way to do the monthly, keep them in the family, build your community, have them paying you, I think that's the wave certainly of the future, the near future, and you can build such value. And so any businesses are out there like that.
yeah, and do it to your passion, so work doesn't feel like work, and also obviously add value, and then sky's the limit really with that sort of thing. Um, I wanted to ask you, let's say the opportunity is property prices, because a lot of our subscribers, they are into potentially growing wealth, buying the dip in regards to property and land and owning, physical assets. So let's say, the opportunity is that property prices drop severely in the next few years. Where, in your opinion, this isn't financial advice from Shaun, but this is just education. Where would you hold your assets until that time? Because I don't, I see big risks. I mean, you're a heavy risk taker holding a lot of money or all your funds in a bank account. And you're also sort of risk at the moment in sort of holding it in stocks and anything fiat priced. What are your thoughts on, I guess, gold, silver? What are your thoughts on the crypto market and any other things?
I think you have to be in gold and silver in particular. That's why I said read an economic history book. When I was in college, we didn't have the money to buy gold, George, but we speculated and made a killing. I made $80,000 in the fall of '80 in the option market playing homestake mining, just playing gold options. Now, I'm not. I'm telling your people to get in gold is a hard asset, but yes, absolutely, you need to be in gold and silver. Great inflation hedges, and inflation is not only here; it's going to get worse. Um, you have to be in currency, cash, but watch where you've got it. If you don't have it in one of the big ones, you better be careful because you don't know when the government right now they've got the moral hazard standard doesn't exist. What's too big to fail? No one really knows, and so the good news for the European banks is there's so few, and the countries are going to prop them up. The Swiss could not let Credit Suisse fail because you had 16,000 jobs in Switzerland alone. So you've got a little bit of insurance there. Beyond that, I'm very negative on the stock market. I'm more if you're going to hold some kind of asset other than gold or silver, I say it better be something you operate, something you control. And lastly, I don't I'm not a buyer of cryptocurrency yet. I think it hasn't gotten the whipping the Fed wants it, or the government, the U.S. government wants it to have, and I think a lot of EU countries as well. If they're going to be the white knight they want to be, they need to whip it some more. And then once they've whipped it well and they've got their own currency, then it'll be okay because it'll be a stepchild. But I think we're a little ways away from that.
Yeah, I think there's further profit to be made in the crypto market. I just feel like there is some kind of, I mean, we've already seen planned collapses in the market to deter buyers through FTX, potentially the Luna collapse, where basically, they just basically create these issues to destroy the market and deter people from them. And I think it's to create their own cryptocurrency, which is basically the central bank digital currency. They don't want any other solutions apart from this. I see Bitcoin unfortunately being infiltrated, which it kind of already has, where countries like El Salvador are using them as payment systems. They're fully trackable and traceable, basically like CBDCs. So that's the issue with Bitcoin being a fully transparent blockchain. That's the issue with Bitcoin. And that's why we promote privacy coins right now. And that's why we're quite long on privacy coins for this time. We're quite long on Bitcoin as well. I mean, we don't promote it because of the fact that it is one of the status coins. But I do feel that there will be a few amount of crypto that will benefit during this time. Let's see how it happens. Let's see how things play out. I mean, it's never in stone. But yeah, I think the advice on the gold and silver, that sort of sector is going to be important to at least grow and preserve wealth in this time. So let's move on to the Grey Choice. What is the Grey Choice book? Where can people find it?
Well, you can buy it on Amazon. The book is this. My first day as a management trainee, I walk in. A few weeks later, I take a test with about 30 other young men and women. And the first question is, have you stole anything from this company? And my answer was no. And I was in the front row, and the consulting firm person who was administrating looked down and said, "Oh, no, no." And he stopped everyone and said, "You have to answer yes to question one." Well, I immediately decided to debate him. And what his answer was, at some point, you'll steal a pen, a pad, a piece of paper. And literally a couple of months later, a guy about 8 or 9 years older said, "You're new to town. My girlfriend has a friend you ought to meet." We went out on a blind date to a baseball game. We sat in company seats. When the night was over, I said, "Well, I gave him $90, and he used a company credit card to pay for it." Anyone who shops on Cyber Monday is stealing time from their employer if they're employed by someone. And the analogy that's used is, if you leave LA on a plane bound for Washington, D.C., and you're off by 1 degree, given the time, the speed, and the distance, you end up in New York City. And yes, there is a very small percentage of the population that are truly criminal, that don't have any boundaries. But most of us, and this is what happened to me, it happens over time. And over time, you slowly make decisions that whenever you get down to as I did, to the point of absolute, and it was driven by fear and greed of the situation I was in, but that's not a justification. But those were the factors around me that it became very easy to say, well, I'm not taking money, I can do this. But it didn't just happen one day. It happened literally over 30 years. And so I talk about I've had the most unbelievable career, success beyond my wildest dreams. In fact, I love the saying in life, seldom does someone realize their greatest dreams or their worst fears. Well, I've realized way beyond my greatest dreams. And other than the loss of a child, which thank God I haven't experienced, I'm at the next of my worst fear. So having done that, I wrote the book to say, you can get yourself there without ever knowing you're there. And then when you're there, you can make the wrong decision. And I did. And there was a study done in 1971 by a Stanford criminologist. And this is a summary, and it's so true. Given the right set of facts and circumstances, any man or woman can do anything. And, I met Nando Prado many years ago. Actually, we were together on 9/11/01. And, those men were cannibals for a while to survive. And yet you and I can sit here and say we'd never do that. And there's so many things we can look and take our get on our high horse and say we wouldn't do. But the right set of facts and circumstances, and human beings will do a lot of things. And that's exactly what I did. So that's why we call it a cautionary tale. It's to try to get people from not getting too far in the gray. Notice I said too far, because I believe that in business, the real money is made in the margin and it's made in the gray. and you have to be willing to step out in the gray, but you have to know where the gray ends. And that's why you got to be very cautious about how you make decisions. I tell people, and this goes for any person, whether you're an investor or you run a small business, you need to surround yourself with really good people. And I had a 15-year run where I had some great, bright people around me. What's funny was none of them were in banking. And they'd ask me this question often. They go, why do we do this way? And if I said, because we've always done it that way, you know what that meant? We were going to change it. That was their whole philosophy. So you need people around you that challenge you every day. And that's very important. And that in itself helps people not make poor choices. And then the other thing that I believe is key as you go down this path is you don't assume the other person wants to do something as bad as you do or as well. And that has nothing to do with your decision, with any kind a partner. I love, one of my analogies is everybody wants a partner when they start a business. And then I think of Chicago and Lake Michigan on New Year's Day and Moscow and the Volga River when those men and women are out there in those fur coats and then they jump in their Speedos. And as soon as they hit that icy water, they don't care about their partner. They care about themselves getting out. And so you're very hard to find a partner in business or even in a marriage or in life that wants the things the way you do. So I encourage people to really, really analyze the people around them in all relationships.
Yeah, that's really important. I think I've noticed that as well. Like building a network of the right people who have the a mindset similar, but also even better or somewhere. I think you should take advice from people who are where you want to be. Not take advice from too many other sort of people. I think is take advice from people who are where you want to be in your life. And I've kind of begun to grasp that. And I think networking is such a massive thing. Like I've met so many great people through that. I guess yourself as well. But like I've just once you just move that boundary of like this is a stranger and this is just a human being, and I'm interested in speaking to them. They're normally open to that. I mean, just break down those boundaries, open your network. You don't know where that will lead, and the path usually is amazing. But yeah, thank you very much, Shaun. Thanks for joining today and your time. It's been a great conversation, and we'll definitely, look to have you on again in the future, potentially when things get more serious in the economic side of things. It'll be great to have you on and get your perspectives again.
Well, thank you, George. I appreciate it. And I'm always available. And good luck in the near term. The next month or so, your life's going to change, and I'm excited for you.
Yeah. If anyone's not aware, got about a month and a half left until I'm a father officially. So yeah, it's nervous times, but it's a blessing as well. And I think as long as you kind of think of it as like a blessing and a gift from God, if you believe in God or whatever you believe in, I think there's always a reason for it, and it's definitely going to be a challenge, but a beautiful challenge as well. So. Nice one. We'll have all the links in the description. We'll have the link to the Grey Choice in the description. Remember to share and subscribe to the channel. And if you know someone that might find this of value, share it to them. Also, check out the Renegade Lifestyle membership and newsletter, which will be on the website renegadelifestyle.net. You can get access to our Renegade Insider newsletter, which is packed with detailed content from the team and special guests. We help you exit the banking system, like we discussed today. Exit the banking system and actually own assets to preserve your wealth during the Great Reset and get in those opportunities that we discussed on. Also help you create location-independent income, health protocols, spirituality, and much, much more. So our aim is ultimately to help you move away from a system that doesn't serve you, be ungovernable, and all that jazz. Peace and love to you all. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again, Shaun, for coming on.
Thank you.
Cheers.